First off, we are glad that we got the tax conformity bill passed on Thursday. It was the right thing to do, and we're hopeful that the Senate moves on it very quickly as well, because we do need to get this done for the people of Minnesota. But I talked a little bit on the floor yesterday, and I think it is important that we bring the same urgency to the next bill that's coming down the line, which is the flood assistance bill and our deficiency bill. We have some money that we need to appropriate in order to keep some public safety things going on St. Peter's Security Hospital, on dealing with our setup for Ebola, which the money's already been spent. We just need to kind of give the health department the money that they've already spent to accomplish that, to do some flu shots for seniors and some other things. So I'm hopeful that we can move on that quickly and hopefully pass it off the floor next week, because it really is just as urgent as the tax conformity. We had our first significant vote on the floor this year on Tuesday, Monday, I guess, on transparency in elections. It's an issue that we're going to try to continue to work on this year. We think it is important, and particularly after what we saw in the last election. And interestingly, the folks that went through these very, very competitive elections, one was Representative Dave Baker from Wilmer area, and in his legislative survey that he put out, a legislative questionnaire, he said his first goal in the Minnesota legislature was to change the laws to limit the horrible negative ads that are ruining our political process. He had his chance on Monday. He passed on that. He voted not to bring transparency to that. But I'm hopeful that because of all these folks that are newly elected that went through these terrible elections with lots of negative ads, and nobody liked it, Minnesotans hated it, that we're going to be able to make some progress bipartisanly on that issue as well this year. I hope that floor vote is not an indication of where things are going to be going in the future. Next week, just a couple things that I think are important to highlight. In House File 1, the Republicans put out their tax bill, and the most significant part of it, and the most striking part of it to me, is that it provides a 10% tax cut for the owners of businesses, but no tax relief at all for their employees, the people that work for them. And it's really the employees whose wages have been stagnating for the last decade. We still are struggling with that issue. Next week, one of the first bills that Representative Davids, Chair Davids, is going to hear is a Sarah Anderson bill that basically eliminates the fourth tier, but only for corporations and businesses. Doesn't lower the fourth tier for individuals. So again, we're eliminating the tax, eliminating tax for corporations and not individuals, and not only for corporations, but the very wealthiest corporations at that. And so it'll be, that I think is going to be a common theme this session, and that one that we're going to continue to look out for. Next week as well, the long-term care folks that we worked with last year to pass the 5%, last 2 years really, to pass the 5% increase, is going to have a press conference roll out their proposal. We think that we think we should continue building on the work that we did last year. I know that the Republicans at least said on the campaign trail that they really believe that as well. So I'll be interested to see how that proposal moves through the process. It's about $200 million, but people are going to put their money where their mouth is. I think we should see some bipartisan work on that as well. And then the last thing is this week, last week the House rolled out their transportation bill, and I've talked to some people about this already, but it really is nothing of a bill. It gets about $50 million a year in new money that can only go to roads and bridges. It can't go to highways. It won't go to transit. It is not a comprehensive or a long-term solution. In fact, Speaker Dowd admitted it's a short-term solution, and despaired a little bit about his ability to actually pass a long-term solution to transportation this year. I don't believe that necessarily is the case. I continue to be hopeful. But you also saw the Senate roll out a bill which I have to acknowledge that they actually have a real solution to solve our problems. I am concerned about the very significant amount of bonding that they're putting in that bill. I think $567 million in bonding is part of that package. That does not seem to me to be exactly the right place for us to be going as part of this comprehensive package, or at least too rich from my perspective. But at least they put something on the table that's going to really move the ball forward, and is not just a bridge to nowhere. So I think that that is going to obviously be the premier issue of the legislative session. Kind of the at least first salvos are out right now, if you can call the Republican even a first step, because it really is not much of a step at all. But I will also say, Kurt Doubt now has kind of backed away from that proposal, said we're going to do more, maybe $500 to $750 million in the next 2 years for transportation. And I would only note that we did $750 million in transportation in the last 2 years, and the Republicans were very clear on the campaign trail that they thought that was insufficient. So if that is the bar that they're trying to reach, it is not a sufficient bar, and we need to do better than that. So any questions that people have?
Passing a gas tax off the House floor would likely require significant, perhaps Democratic buy-in and votes. Do you know how many of your caucus members are willing to get behind some sort of fuel tax increase?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the exact number, and I don't know that because there's not really a proposal to particularly look at. But from my perspective, we've said all along that this needs to be a bipartisan issue. We said that for the last 2 years, and I continue to believe that that's the case. We have some things that we think we need to see in a transportation package. We think it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to do roads and bridges, but also needs to do statewide transit. It needs to be long-term and not short-term, so it needs to solve the problem long-term. I don't believe that it should primarily involve general fund, and I don't believe it should primarily involve borrowing. I think we should actually put a proposal together that's going to actually invest in our roads and our bridges and our transit system. And it has to be statewide. It can't pit one part of the state against another. So if we can come up with a proposal and we're willing to roll up our sleeves to accomplish that, I think that you could expect the House Democrats to put up their proportionate share of the votes to pass that kind of a bill. And that's the kind of, I think, bipartisan lawmaking that Minnesotans are interested in. But it would really have to meet those criteria.
Proportionate share equals what?
Well, it's we're a little less than a majority of the legislature, so I think a little less than a majority of the votes.
Are there the numbers there on the other side of the aisle to get you a majority?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's not particularly my issue, I suppose, at this point. But it's not like we're going to be walking away from this. But we think we need a real solution, and if we can get a proposal that meets those criteria, we are willing to put up the votes and come to the table.
What do you see happening? Is the bill currently a placeholder? Do you think there's going to be a completely separate bill for more of a long-term solution if this is just the short term?
Well, I think the bill that the House Republicans put out, they've essentially said this can't be our bill, kind of from the pushback to it, and they've already moved, toward, saying 500 to 750 million. I think that they're going to look at all the options, and I think that that's fair to kind of put everything out and take a little bit more time to put together a bill that actually will solve the problem, and we'll work with them on that. But what's out there right now is certainly not adequate and not sufficient by anybody's standards.
Does this portend that transportation is going to be one of the last things done this session?
Well, that very well could be the case, yes.
With the criteria that you laid out, does that mean in your mind that there needs to be some form of a tax increase in order to fund transportation, or is there another way?
Well, there may be another way. No one has identified that for me yet. So I think we are open to helping kind of put together the revenue increases that are going to be needed to do what we need to accomplish.
Over on the Senate side, Senator Dibble essentially says you go big or you go home on transportation. He doesn't want kind of half a loaf. Do you think that's likely, that it's either a really big package or nothing at all?
I think that, well, yes. I mean, in some sense, I don't know if it has to be a big package, but it needs to be comprehensive and it needs to be long-term. It can't just be a Band-Aid. Because that's what I think the people of Minnesota expected. That's, if there was one issue that was talked about on the campaign trail that we're going to do something about, it was this. So, I think Senator Dibble is right, not necessarily in all the details of his proposal, but right in the idea that we should solve this long-term now.
The deficiency bill that you're talking about here, you talked about Ebola in the security hospitals, or anything else that you see as a vital component?
Well, I think the whole deficiency bill is probably something that needs to be passed. There's money for the Minnesota Zoo that probably is, there is a deficiency there, and if we're going to stand up by what we have, pay our bills in a sense, we should make sure that we take care of that.
We talked about the House Republican tax relief ideas that we'll start to hear next week. Is there a tax relief idea that your caucus is going to push?
There may be some issues, and I don't think our caucus is necessarily opposed to tax relief, but we think that we should kind of, if we're going to do tax relief, we should do it more along the lines of what we did the last 2 years, which is focus on people as opposed to kind of business and corporate tax cuts. You know, Representative Drazkowski's going on the road, I think, starting next week with these property tax hearings around the state. You know, we did make some good progress on property taxes, but we still have farther to go. So I would like to see some additional money put into property tax relief again, you know, and what form that takes. You know, we've always thought that direct property tax relief is in some sense a stronger place to go because it actually gets in people's pockets. But, you know, we're open to having that discussion. You know, and then I think the governor's idea around the child care tax credit, again, that's a proposal that's actually going to benefit families as opposed to business. And if we're going to do tax relief, that would be more my preference.
What's your expectation how quickly the Senate gets to tax conformity and how quickly it needs to get to the governor's desk?
I think that they'll get it done next week. And, you know, I'm hopeful that they'll get it done on Tuesday. I'm obviously not the greatest expert on the Senate, though, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I'm hopeful that they'll get it done next week.
Senate, the governor, or excuse me, Senator Bach said on Thursday that there was a deal on the table last fall regarding the Capitol space that you at the last minute didn't sign on to. Was there a deal at hand, and what did it entail?
Well, there was discussions in 2013. I'm not sure what last fall is, but the fall of 2013 about an allocation of space, which we were ready to sign. It was actually Senator Bach that decided not to sign that at the time because of the uncertainty around the Senate office building. In the interim, since then, though, things have changed, and we passed legislation and through both the House and the Senate. I don't know if it's legislation, but we both agreed that we need a building with 67 offices now in the Senate office building, which wasn't the case in the fall of 2013. And from that perspective, I think that does change the discussion, you know, in terms of the number of offices, Senate offices that are going to be over at the Capitol. One, I think, thing that's also important to point out with regard to this, and I haven't been part of the most recent discussions, but we did keep the Republicans informed kind of all through this process in the House about kind of what was going on. So they've had a sense of where things are, you know, for quite a long time.
He said it was pre-election 2014 that
That's not the case.
There's rumbling from the senators from time to time about the House forcing us to have this building with 67 offices. Is there anything to that House forcing idea, and what's the argument for having 67 offices for senators in that building?
Well, I mean, I think there is probably some truth to us forcing them to have 67 offices. That's what we passed out of our Rules Committee as a condition to approving the building. You know, the thing is, you know, if you have, I've never quite understood why people would want to, especially, you know, kind of chairman and other things, would want to have an office in the Capitol when all the members they work with are over in this other building. I think, you know, Senator Bach's idea of this Senate office building was that it would create this more collegiality. It would create this ability for people to communicate and work together. So having people in that building, I think, actually accomplishes what Senator Bach rightly was thinking about as a purpose of that building.
So should chairs not have offices in the building? I mean, is that your sticking point, just leadership, minority leader, majority leader? Is that it?
I mean, that's kind of the position that we took before, you know, the other folks took over. But, you know, that's a discussion, I suppose, that now needs to be had among the other leaders. And
apparently you were close. A few days ago, Speaker Dowd said a deal was imminent. You were close, and it's still not wrapped up, right?
And again, I haven't been part of those discussions, so I can't speak to that.
Do you have a view as to how many Senate offices should be in the remodeled Capitol?
Well, I mean, I think if we have 67 offices in the Senate office building, that's where the Senate offices should be. So, you know, having leadership offices in the Capitol, you know, makes some sense, you know, to me, and we have that on the House side as well. You know, beyond that, you'd have to really make the argument to convince me.
How about higher ed? Did the Senate create a little trouble with the U? The U didn't seem delighted with their 2-year college proposal.
You know, it's competition. You know, there's going to be competition. I mean, $1 billion is a lot of money, but it's you know, on the other hand, it's not a lot of money. It goes pretty quickly. You know, after you start talking about, you know, tax cuts and long-term care investments and transportation and, you know, all these other things. I really do want to compliment the Senate on that, though. I mean, I think putting that idea out there, even if, you know, we're not ultimately able to achieve it, it starts the right kind of conversation and starts you know, it's a bold idea that will start a conversation. And I think at this point in the session, And at this point, kind of in where we are in our economy and our budget surplus is the kind of conversations we ought to be having.
But does it shorthand the U?
Well, I mean, it would be much more difficult to do, all that the U wants to do as well. So, I mean, there are competition for dollars. Certainly, yes.
Where's your caucus at on Senator Lori's bill to disband the MNsure board and kind of turn it into a more traditional state agency?
We haven't talked about it as a caucus, and I haven't really looked at the bill that closely. Again, I guess what I would say is I applaud Senator Lori for putting another bold idea on the table to kind of get at some of these issues. We had this discussion in 2013, and a decision was made, and I think probably supported bipartisanly, this part of the decision, not to have it as a state agency for a variety of reasons. Maybe the lessons we've learned, though, in the last 2 years with the ability to have more oversight and those kind of things, maybe it makes sense, but that's one that is still, in my mind, a work in progress, and I can't give you a really great answer on that.
So I hear bold and big over and over in the Senate. What's going on? Why is the Senate going so big, and why isn't the House?
Well, I mean, I think that I think the Senate has, been working on these issues for the past couple of years, and they've been building up momentum, and I think they understand we need to start some of these conversations, and I also think it comes from their understanding and their appreciation of the fact that we're in a different place than we have been in our state, in particular our state government, in a decade. I mean, for the first time since I've been here, really, we have a structural surplus stretching into the future. The economy is getting better. It is time now to think about what can we do today that's going to pay off long term. And so, I think I imagine the House Republicans have a little different idea. I mean, there must be some tension in the House Republican caucus from the perspective of they campaign on the fact that our budget is already bloated and too big, have $1 billion surplus, but you can't reconcile those two things. How can you spend the surplus on all these good things they want to do, and at the same time say, we believe our government is already too big, it was too big 2 years ago? I think that's going to be a really interesting tension as we move through the legislative session of how they reconcile the fact that they don't want to spend taxpayer money, but they want to spend taxpayer money. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming.